Good morning, everyone. Let's get started. I'm sure others will join in progress. Thanks for joining us for this really important topic today. It's something that's come to our attention, these issues, and for a few years now, but I think exacerbated by students spending more and more time online. Um, let's start by talking about why we're gathering today. Although this is a virtual event, we still view it as a gathering, and we really wanted to bring people together. We think about the word partnership a lot in the middle school, and ways that support our students together, and ways that build a healthy online life. So it's our intention as a school to help build those skills. We know that more and more as students navigate an unknown future, they'll be spending more and more time doing things that we used to do in person online. And so as COVID hit, and as we students by necessity needed to spend a little more time online, we've seen more and more parents come to us asking for support and guidance. And we know that with anything, if we partner with parents, it's twice as strong, whatever our initiatives are and whatever our intentions are. So thank you for joining us today. And we'll have this recorded and posted on on our school channels for other people to view at a later date as well. The people in the panel today, our expert team. I'm joined by Heather McNeil Roy, who's our K-12 pre-K to 12 technology coordinator, and Courtney Beck, who's our middle school counseling department chair, representing our counseling team. And why this meeting now? As I said, we see it's really a need. We did hold a webinar in the first semester on productivity and helping students to stay organized during distance learning, and managing the academic side of being online. But we know that there's more to that, and that students are also navigating how to have healthy online relationships with their peers, navigating in some cases some risky content, or sometimes even dangerous. And so we want to partner with parents. We want to share a little bit about what we do at school so that you can build on that at home. And we also want to save some time to share some resources that you might find useful and answer any of your questions. So later on in the presentation, we'll have an opportunity for you to enter some questions in the Q&A box. And you're welcome to enter them at any point if a question emerges, and we'll get to those, as many of those as we can at the conclusion of our presentation today. I wanted to start with a scenario, and there won't be a quiz after this scenario, we could see several potentially positive ways to resolve this scenario, or to address the scenario as a parent. But I wanted to give you a moment to read the scenario and think to yourself about what you would do if you were in this parent's position. And this isn't an actual scenario, but it's a scenario that wouldn't be a surprise to us if it happened during middle school. So have a read, and then we can talk through some of the potential responses by Mrs. Cordero. So when you think about your response to this, I think there's kind of several potential options. And maybe you're thinking, my first instinct is to talk to my child, go through their phone. Maybe your first instinct was to contact the school or the parents of the students involved. Some might even consider calling the police right away. It is a legal issue in the UAE, as many of you know, and we'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation. And it really does depend a lot on other circumstances. We don't have all the information here. I would say what we definitely encourage, all of this is happening outside of school, but it could certainly impact the way the students' school experience when they come to campus. Involving parents is definitely a great first step. So if you were in Miss Cordero's shoes, and you were able to reach out to Mark and Sylvester's and Frank's parents, and just let them know that it's happening, maybe send a screenshot along so that they know the nature of it. That's a great first step. You could email me, and I definitely would be happy to partner. In this type of a situation, we view our role as more of a resource. It crosses the line, though, when maybe Frank is making threats to a student and making them afraid to come to campus, or maybe a student is not not only doing this outside of school, but during their time on campus. And in that case, it does become a situation where we want to address it from a, restorative discipline type of scenario where we're looking to support student decision making. Some students might choose to ban their child from ever using social media again. I would say that's probably an impractical consequence. But you might want to give a break from social media or take a student's phone, or consider whether or not they should have a phone at that age. And we see these types of situations arise all the time. And we see in some cases, we're navigating how to handle that. And we know that parents are struggling to know exactly what to do. And in certain cases, all of these might be considered acceptable responses. But we want to partner with you. And if you're ever not sure what to do, we're happy to partner with you about next steps. And we've done that plenty of times with parents at ASD. And I think a lot of times parents are just looking for, they reach out to us because they just don't know what the next step is. We'll touch on kind of some of the themes that will help us understand how we'd respond to this scenario a little bit later as we go. But I wanted to share a little bit about what we do as a school and kind of our approach. So in terms of parents, the responsibility of parents when it comes to our partnership to support student decision-making online is to have communication with your child about it. Dialogue is really powerful, especially at this age where their attention turns more to the impact or the perceptions of their peers rather than how adults feel about them. So opening those avenues can be challenging, but really powerful. Keeping that dialogue open, partnering with us, and we can problem solve together. And we do that all the time. I think, I can think of, since my time here, dozens of times when parents have reached out, not sure what to do. And we can either, sometimes it's not not the school's role to get involved. Sometimes it is, and we can work that out together. I think if the situation warrants it, there is a time and a place to notify local authorities. As I mentioned, much of this happens outside of school and sometimes even involving groups with students who aren't our students. And so if there is online harassment happening, it's totally within your rights to notify local authorities, especially if you have reached out multiple times and it continues. And I know Heather will touch on some aspects of UAE law related to that. We view our role as ensuring students feel safe at school. So that's kind of our bellwether for whether or not we would get involved in like a disciplinary case, for example. If a student felt threatened by coming to school or felt unsafe at school, that's our number one duty of care, is to make sure students feel safe when they come to our campus and when they're engaging in school here. And also we want to make sure that students know what we tolerate and what we don't when it comes to how we treat each other. That's our commitment to our core values, and students need to see that there are some things in our community that we tolerate and some things that we don't. And sometimes that looks like a discipline situation or more of a consequences levied by the school, but always with the intention to teach even those who are targeting others. And also to serve as a resource, as I mentioned, to parents. And the student has a role too. We expect all of our students to uphold the values of the school, and we know that you expect them to uphold the values of your family. And one of the big aspects of our program is cultivating trusted adults across our school. And what we want students to do is, if they're facing a situation and they're not sure how to handle it, that they have a trusted adult they could reach out to if they feel unsafe or they feel like someone else is in harm's way. We have a lot of programming built around this. I mentioned, reaching out to a trusted adult. Students can also click into the Upstander form, which is available on our on our Go page at the moment. We've worked with Harvard School of Education with a program called Making Caring Common, where they collect data from our students, and that informs some of our advisory programming, assembly programming. Last year, we invited a consultant to come, or a speaker to come, named Justin Patchen. And we talked, it wasn't a school initiative, but we empowered parents to get together with the Wait Until 8th initiative, which was basically, empowering parents in terms of numbers to get together and hold off on students getting this powerful technology until they're in 8th grade. We also had a screening of the documentary Screenagers. I heard there's actually a new one out now. It's a little more up to date, so check that out. Great documentary to watch with your child. And all this is based around our core values and what we call the Falcon Way, which is basically an expression of our culture and how we do things around here. And that's something that we communicate to students in a variety of ways throughout the school year. And what we really want to do is we want to collect data. We do that through our student well-being census, but also many different avenues. Our counselors send out well-being check-in surveys. You might have seen the needs assessment that they sent to parents. And we collect all that data with the intention of that informing responsive programming that supports student well-being, because we want students not just to be successful academically, but also socially, emotionally, and make a positive contribution when they leave our building. This is a data point that we use to gauge the efficacy of some of that programming, and we ask this to students in various ways throughout the year over time. And we want to make sure students can identify at least one trusted adult they could go to if they had a serious problem. And sometimes that's their advisor, sometimes that's their counselor, sometimes I was notified by a counselor that I was identified as a trusted adult for a student last year, which was like a big win for me, because not always the assistant principal is identified as a trusted adult. But whoever it is in the school, we want to make sure that they have someone who they can go to. And right now, about 90% of our students can identify at least one trusted adult within the school. And we think we're proud of that, but we also know we can do better. And so when we identify, a lot of times counselors will be able to identify students who can't name a trusted adult. And then we think about ways that we could forge that type of connection so that everyone in our school has an adult they could go to if they were grappling with a serious problem. This is some of the well-being census data. We're waiting actually on this year's results, which will be really interesting because it will be, include the time of COVID and the time when we spent more time online. But compared to other schools in Dubai, when it comes to cyberbullying in particular, it's a little bit backwards the way that the question's phrased, but about 87% identify that there's an absence of cyberbullying in our school. With another about 15% saying that it's medium to little cyberbullying, and then there are about I'd say about 2 or 3% of students who are saying that they have considerable cyberbullying happening in our school. And although that is better than Dubai at large, we know that if you're a parent or if you're a child that's in that red zone where you're experiencing cyberbullying, the rest of the statistics don't matter, right? Because that's your experience. And we want to make sure that we squeeze out that red and orange. And we want to make sure that we have a school where not only with cyberbullying, but other aspects of victimization, that we have a community that is safe for everyone, both physically and emotionally. This is a chart we use because sometimes the word bullying is thrown around, or students don't always understand what bullying is. And so we use this chart sometimes, whether in counseling, or sometimes I'll use this with students to identify what is bullying. And really, bullying is something that is repeated, it's ongoing, it's planned and on purpose, it's targeting the bully. The target of the bully is really impacted by it. It usually involves a power balance as well, whether that's age or whether that's social clout. We try to stop it repeatedly and nothing seems to work. And so that's when we know it's bullying. But that doesn't mean that mean or rude behavior or social conflict can't be just as difficult for students to deal with. And we want to support them with that as well. This is another, Making Caring Commons, a group I mentioned that we've been working with, and they kind of parse out different aspects of student victimization is what they would call it. And you can see here, there's a part at the bottom I thought was interestingly named harm by phone. And it's not the biggest area of concern for us compared to other aspects. And you can see the others reflected there. But again, if you're in that red, it doesn't matter if 92% of other students aren't experiencing that. It's still a big issue, and we want to make sure that everyone feels safe in our community. It's really complicated, it's subtle sometimes, and sometimes it's unclear. Is this bullying? Is this social conflict? Is this drama that we need to navigate? Do we need to trust our students to navigate it, or should we get involved? And all of those things are kind of case by case, and they're highly nuanced. And so that's what we're here for, to help you navigate those things, the fine line between banter and meanness or bullying, those are issues we're here to help you navigate and help you decide what the best course of action for your child is. So I'm going to turn it over now to Courtney, who's our department chair of counseling, that's going to speak a little bit to, the developmental stage that students are at and how to support them at this particular place in their lives.
Thank you, Corey. Before we take a dive into strategies, I think it's really important to put into context where your children are at developmentally and emotionally, and understand the importance of your role as a parent. So when it comes to social media and gaming, these factors have a significant impact on your child's experience. So as you know, and I will always go back to it, a teen's brain is still under construction. So risk-taking, poor decision-making, impulsivity, awareness of peer approval, and absolute thinking, those all increase, as does do things like seeing things as black and white, as total truth with no end in sight. And I'm sure as I say some of these things, you might be imagining your child as I say them. But in the context of social media, it might mean that they're posting a picture that's embarrassing to themselves or to someone else. When it comes to gaming, it might mean playing all night instead of doing homework and getting enough sleep. So as I said, they also tend to see things or see situations as final and forever. And that might mean that if someone makes a cruel comment and someone else agrees, they might feel that everyone agrees with it, and that will never change. With their increased focus on peer approval, it also means being preoccupied with what people, but especially their peers, think about them. And social media can really play into those insecurities around other people's opinions, as can in-game chat. So of course, adolescents, still on the other side. Of course, adolescents are more impulsive. And where we might pause as adults, where we might pause before we post something or sending a message to someone in the heat of the moment, adolescents oftentimes don't have the capacity to control those impulsive decisions. And when you're thinking of social media from this perspective, from the mind of a teenage brain, it might be easier to understand some of the elements that can contribute to your child's experience online. So as Corey mentioned, since the start of the pandemic, we have all relied on technology more than ever before. And many people have turned to social media or gaming to connect with family and their peers. So kids aren't just connecting online for school or for brief social connections. They're connecting more frequently online, and in some cases, that might be their only social interaction outside of school. With the increases in technology use, there can be an increase in things such as comparison, peer pressure, drama, and isolation. And so keeping up with connections and staying in the know, so there's no FOMO, fear of missing out, it can really make social media more compulsive than fun. And since, as I mentioned, adolescent brains are already prone to feel vulnerable around what others think, the way they use social media, it can definitely impact their decision-making and how they feel about themselves. A lot of apps have an age recommendation of 13 years or older, and these apps can give teens a lot of power. So as you know, some of you might know where the saying comes from, but as the saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. So it really is important to know your child and to recognize that readiness for social media doesn't dawn on the child's 13th birthday. I mean, if you really think about it, it's tricky for adults to balance being reachable 24/7. So it's even more challenging for teens. Many of the apps and games we use are designed to keep using them and checking them and playing them. And so that's where that impulsivity or poor decision-making really comes into play. So while there are risks, there's also preventative measures that can be taken to create a safer online environment for your child. And I'm going to be speaking to some talking points, but Heather will be getting into some strategies and supports as well. So as I said, here's some talking points you can use with your child or children. With adolescents, there's a very fine line between showing interest and invading their space. And we're not always going to get it right, but it's so, so, so important to keep trying. That doesn't mean hovering over them all of the time, but it really does mean having that open communication and partnering with them to see how they're comfortable with being supported. It's also important to know that mistakes will happen. And I want to say that again, mistakes will happen. So try your best to go into the conversation with your child without judgment. No matter what the circumstances, it's good for your child to know that we want them safe first. The lessons will come, but ultimately it's about safety. So try to put your anger and your shock and your outrage aside and step into support mode for your kids. So remember to listen and try not to lecture. Also, I think it's important to try not to jump to conclusions as much as you want to, and don't jump right into action for them. Oftentimes kids figure it out on their own. When they come to you, you know, everything's a big deal. When we're thinking about them thinking in black and white and their concrete thinking, they see things as final and forever, but in reality, they might have a message with their friend 10 minutes later and everything will be worked out. So kids really can figure some things out on their own or with friends, and it can lead to a solution that better fits their needs. So really try to pause before you jump into action for them.
Hi there. So in this part of the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the practical tools that are available to you as parents and some strategies that you can use before you maybe even wade into the waters of social media for your children in your house. So we'll just go to the next slide there, Corey. Oh, you don't have the update. That's okay. So one thing I would recommend, I always like to think of it as when we teach our kids to cross the street, we don't just suddenly decide we've never had them cross the street ever, ever, ever. And then at 13, we say, okay, go shopping down the corner. What we want to do is help our kids learn to do things safely in a way that they are at first very supervised, then partially supervised, and then we allow that freedom to go. And so part of what I'll talk about today are those ways that we can help scaffold for our kids and give them increasing levels of responsibility and freedom within lessons and support as we go. So even when we think about a phone, you may start with your child at a younger age, only being allowed to use the phone when they need to call you after swimming lessons. Or you may have it that they can have the phone only to call you for an emergency. And then when they don't need the phone, it comes back to you. And then as time goes on, you start to allow them to have it more and have greater responsibility. And when you're ready, it may be time to start thinking about allowing them to have some of the apps that they might want to have to communicate with their friends. Because as we know, this is a big part of their lives right now. They may not be able to physically spend as much time with their friends as they would like, which is a really important part of being in middle school. And so that digital communication has become so important to them in their social lives. Let's take a look at that next slide, Corey. So one of the things I recommend before you even allow your child to start with social media, if they come to you and say, I really want Instagram, I need it, then what you want to do is, the first question is why? What is it about this app that you really want it for? And that can help a little bit with you understanding what their ultimate goals are for using it. Is it because they want to be able to connect with their friends? If they just say, all my friends have it, you know what, I don't really consider that a great reason. So ask them, what is it about that app that makes you want to be able to use it? Maybe they've seen all the really cool filters and they want to be able to develop some photos and not share them, but just create really cool photos. Maybe they want to be able to just chat with their friends. So establishing the reason why they want that app is great. Let's go to the next slide, Corey. So then the next thing I highly recommend is do your research. And my kids will tell you, drives them crazy. They'll ask for an app and I'll say, I'll need to look into that. And so the first thing that you're going to want to do is I recommend 3 things that you look into. The first, Common Sense Media is always a great place to start. And I'll explain a bit more about where you can go to find some specific information on the site. The next thing I strongly recommend is making sure to look at your program policy settings. So if they said to you, I want to use Instagram, go to Instagram. What are their policies? What's the age level? What are the restrictions? And then finally, if you've decided, okay, I'm all right with these things, I'm going to look at the settings and recommendations for the app. So let's dig a little bit deeper into that. So first of all, Common Sense Media is an amazing resource, and I'm sure that many of you have heard of it before. But what I really like is the Parent Ultimate Guides. They are a really great way to talk in very practical terms about what is the app for, what is its used for, what are some of the pitfalls without scaremongering, and also looking at the positives of it, And then also looking at some things that you might want to consider before allowing it for your child. And so this is also a great place to also look at general discussions about social media. And also another resource you might want to look at is the Family Online Safety Institute. They as well have some great resources. And of course, in addition to Common Sense Media, there are a lot of other sites that do have parent recommendations. So take a moment, don't say yes right away, do a little bit of digging. Okay, next step in that digging, Corey, let's take a look at that. So the next one is let's actually, yes, there's the fine print. I'm not necessarily saying you need to get totally into that because I think Common Sense Media does a pretty good job talking about it, but we really do need to think about what kind of data are they collecting from our children. This is really important to think about because will their username be available? This might be really important to deciding how you name your child's username. Do you need to make it in a way that it's not blatantly obvious that your child is a young child? Do you need to do it in a way so that it's not easily copied? So making sure we're thinking about those things. Here at the school, one of the things we take very seriously is children's data privacy. There is the COPA, which is part of the US, and GDPR, which is Europe and Asia. And so these are regulations that help with protecting data. And this is where that 13 plus often comes from, because these regulations talk about the fact that we need to protect children up to the age of 13, both their privacy and their data. Because as we know, social media, a lot of them make their money from mining our content. The value, it might be free, but the value is in what we give them, in who we are, and what we're interested in, and how we can be marketed to. And so we need to be very well aware of how that data is being used from our child. How are their pictures being protected? How is their identity being protected? These are the things that we really need to consider before we say, yes, you can have that app. We'll go to the next slide, Corey. So that's why you'll see a lot of there's social media restrictions that are really important to be aware of. You can see that most of the ones that kids are interested in are 13 plus. However, for example, TikTok does offer a version for younger children, but you would have need to do the research to understand about that under 13 option and what the privacy is that's involved there. As well, being aware that YouTube, a lot of kids want to be a YouTuber. So looking at what are the restrictions that can be put in place for children of a certain age. Now, again, some of these can be up to you. Some of these do allow some flexibility, and you do know your child better than others. So when we're thinking about graduated privileges, would it be something that you together decide that you're going to sign up for an account and use it together first? Is it something that you agree to? Now, something to keep in mind though, some of these apps specifically ask, how old are you? And so if you're allowing your child to say, I am older than 13, you're actually encouraging that misinformation and misuse of the app. So we have to think again about sort of those moral lessons we're giving as well. So if there are options where there's flexibility and parental control and management, then it may be acceptable to have it earlier than 13. And the app will sometimes say with parental supervision, etc. However, if when you sign up and it specifically says, how old is your child? You need to be honest. And there's a reason for that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, the other thing I find really helpful is once I've said, okay, I'm happy with all this other research I've done on this app, I'm going to look a bit more into the account settings. And so what I really liked, there was an app actually recently that my son was in, and I was like, oh, I'm not sure about this one. So I did a lot of research. And what I like is some of them actually have family safety pages that actually go through how you should set up the account for your child. And so they'll actually say, how do you make sure that their password is safe? How do you make sure their pictures can't be shared with people who aren't their friends? How can you be sure to make it so that they can't get invitations from people they don't know? These are a great way to, again, when we think about those graduated privileges, we are helping them set up some safety in place to help them build good habits, even as adults, that we need to consider. The last thing I want you to also think about are the notifications. So what kind of notifications is this app going to have? Are you going to be repeatedly, is your child going to repeatedly hear ticks and dings and beeps? Because when we talk about that fear of missing out, that FOMO, if they're sitting at the dinner table and their phone goes ding, then immediately they're thinking, oh, I got a message or I got a new picture. Or if they're doing their homework and hear that ding. So one of the things I recommend, not even to adults and kids, is turn off notifications so that you have the power to decide when you want to go to the app, not the app calling to you to come and see. So we should all take a look at how we set up our notifications and prevent the app from controlling us. I have put together a list of resources of how you can set up your permissions, and we'll share that later after the presentation, but I wanted you to be aware of that. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, Corey, thanks. So the other thing, you've done your research. You're like, okay, I think we're ready, but now we need to talk about the how. And again, every family is different, every child is different, and you as a parent know your child best. So although we're giving some recommendations, that doesn't mean that that's what has to happen for every family, but these are some conversations you should have. Most importantly, who do we agree that you can communicate with? We agree, for example, to start, that you can communicate with your cousins and your best friends. We agree that you can communicate with classmates who might invite you, but we don't agree that you can ever have a conversation with someone you don't know. What can you and can't you post? I don't mind if you post pictures where your face is not involved. I don't mind if you post pictures where you're in the picture, but nobody else should be in the picture. These are conversations you need to have with your child. The next one is where and when. So think about this. A lot of these social media programs can also be accessed on a laptop. And so I think it's really important that we try as much as possible to keep our laptop for school and social on other devices. So you may want to make it clear to your child that we're not going to install this access to this program, or you should not be going to this website on your computer. And again, if that program allows for notifications, making sure that those notifications aren't interfering with their ability to learn. As well, when I talk about where, I mean, is it okay at the dinner table for everybody to be checking their social media? Is it okay that you're allowed to shut yourself in your room with the lights off and nobody's allowed in? Probably not. So trying to make it, again, a social thing, that at any time as your mom, I should be able to walk by just in passing, and it should be okay. It shouldn't be that you have to hide your phone, because if that's what's happening, you already know you're not making good choices. And the other thing is too, I should be able to walk by and go, hey, what's going on with Instagram right now? Or the fact that you can come to me and say, I saw this really funny video on TikTok. It reminded me of you, Mom. Can I show it to you? And being able to have those conversations about the tools, so there's an ongoing dialogue all the time, is really important. And finally, what should you do if something happens that makes you uncomfortable? If someone invites you that you don't know, they should feel comfortable coming to you and talk about, well, how do we prevent that from happening? If they see content that makes them upset, how can you help them cope with that? How can you talk through that? How can you help them with their settings to prevent that from happening again? But if they know that they can come to you and chatting about what's happening on their phone is a regular thing in your house, then that's not going to be a barrier to them to letting you know that something happened. We've even talked at times when, I'll get a phone message and I'll go, I have no idea who this person is. I'm not calling them back. Unless they send me a message to know who it is, I don't call them back. And that just becomes a regular conversation in the house, bringing examples. We'll go to the next slide, Corey, thanks. The other thing we also need to consider when we're thinking about the things that we're posting, and these again are these conversations we need to have with our kids. This is sort of how I've summarized the UAE laws for the kids. And we share this with our students at ASD. So just being aware of that idea of that we're respectful of the UAE and the things that we post, that we're respectful of the belief of others, that we respect the privacy of others. And this is a big one, that we're not posting pictures of our friends without their permission, or we don't post things about someone that might cause embarrassment. Even if it's someone parking in a handicapped parking spot, we shouldn't be posting things that could cause that person to be embarrassed. We have to be respectful of the privacy of others. And finally, we also have to be aware of our surroundings, making sure that we're not taking photos and posting of government buildings, embassies, etc. This is quite important that our kids understand. Our younger children, most likely, this may happen by accident and they will be reminded that this is not okay. But there are incidents where mistakes have happened and there have been consequences. So it's good to know, as a resident of the UAE, that we can make mistakes at home, perhaps in our home countries, and that's just considered poor social media etiquette. But here, there are greater consequences. And so again, that's why it's really important to keep having conversations with these kids, because we do have to be extra mindful of what we're posting. And I have these conversations with adults and children, just because we have to, again, have sort of a second filter here in the UAE. So it's not just, and if we go to that next slide, Corey, when we think about thinking before we post, we almost need to think generally of these things. And then finally, before I post, is it okay for the UAE? So we need to help our kids again. They want so much to share. They want so much to show off. They want to show their new puppy. They want to show that they got a new pair of shoes. How can they do that in a way that's productive, good for their social life, but also keeping them safe? All right, we'll go to the next slide, Corey. Thank you. So finally, how do we make it a positive experience? We don't want it to be that we're like, oh, what are you doing now? Oh, what's that? Oh, we don't want it to be like that. We want it to be conversations. We want it to be excited about what we're doing. So encourage that sharing by being open to them talking about what's going on. It means when there's trouble, they're also going to come to you. So make sure you encourage them to share a funny picture that a friend shared, or ask if it's okay. Can I, I love what's happening. The weather, the sunset, is it okay if I take a picture and share that? And you're like, yes, go right ahead. Also, it's really great to share those funny stories. So for example, we think about the poor man who came to a meeting with the cat filter. We can talk about ways that something funny's happened in the news, someone posted something by accident and this is what happened. And just bringing those up in light conversations, again, are ways to go, how could we prevent that from happening to ourselves? And also regular check-ins. So depending on your child, you may feel that you need to sit with them and say, can you show me what's going on? How are things going? But we also, again, as Courtney talked about, that delicate balance between supporting their need to have that independence, between making safe choices. So if you see that your child has become very secretive, then maybe it's time to have some greater conversations. Otherwise, regular check-ins should be great. Family agreements are very important too, and I've included that in my resource document that Corey will share as well, about maybe some guidelines about when and where do we all agree we'll use our devices. What are some of the safety things we're going to remember? And having that is something that you share. And ideally, these are all great conversations to have before you even say, yes, you can have that app. Let's go to the next slide, Corey. So there are some ways to help your child monitoring as well. One thing I recommend, especially for any family, is having family sharing or the Google Family Link. And what this does is that your child cannot install any apps on their devices without it going through you first. This is also good to make sure things are paid properly, but it's also another way to verify and also say, whoa, stop. We need to have a conversation first. So again, I've included information on how to use these tools and access them, but I highly recommend them. And this is also another place where you can set time limits and access times, and also even just have conversations again around how long or how often are they checking their phone. But again, I caution, try not to use this as a method of control from you, but as a way to have conversations to grow those graduated privileges and responsibilities.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Courtney. And we see it. We have a couple questions that are popping up. Please in the Q&A chat box, if you have some questions, do populate them there. I wanted to address something that came up that I'm wondering if other parents are thinking about. Heather, maybe you're best suited to answer this question. I know we're talking a lot about social media and non-school apps, but because of the nature of distance learning, we're using Google Hangouts more than ever before. And I know I've heard some parents talk about the ding going off while they're doing their homework. Are there ways to take away those notifications? I've gotten a few right, during this webinar. So,
Yes.
so maybe you can help me as well.
Yeah, so there are ways that you can mute conversations, and there are ways that you can sort of make yourself out of office for a little bit as well. So I will include that. How about I include that on that resource sheet that I've got that we'll send out, and I'll include instructions on how you can do that. But yes, again, it's that whole managing notifications that can be really important, and being able to say, I'm not available right now, or I am available right now, is a very powerful tool to have.
Yeah, great. And again, thank you, Heather, and continue to add some questions. I think that your questions are going to help us understand where you're at, and maybe see some things we might have missed in our presentation. Another thing, an analogy I use just while people are adding their questions, Heather talked a little bit about kind of just popping into your child's social media. You wouldn't organize a birthday party and then put kids alone in a room and never check in on them. You might put your ear to the door, you might pop in and say, does anyone want pizza? Or, so it's the same with social media. And we realize that, one thing that's become clear sometimes when cases get to us, they've been going on for quite some time, and it's clear that parents have no idea about this kind of online persona that their child has developed. And it's actually can sometimes come as quite a shock when they see maybe some mean things that they've said, or even some like racially tinged things that they've said. And so those things, that it's just important to pop in sometimes, as Heather said, just like just what's going on, show me what's happening. And it doesn't have to be Big Brother style. It could just be a check-in, just like you would if you had a sleepover, if you had kids over for the day, you might check in on what they're doing. So I do see something on the Q&A about ES and parents, maybe missing the boat by the time they get to middle school. And so they've given they haven't maybe thought about the long-term consequences of letting their kids be on social media at a younger age, and then it's really hard to take it away once they have it. Heather, do you have any thoughts on that, being both a technology coordinator and a parent of 2 middle school boys?
Yes. So I do think it's really important, again, that allowing the social media is middle school, and having those conversations. But you're right. I think it would be great to talk with elementary parents to start thinking ahead to what it could look like and being ready. But perhaps, again, that idea of the graduated privileges would be that a parent has an account, and you maybe allow your child to post something with you about together as a family, and practicing and seeing what that looks like. One of the things, I don't know if that slide came up or not. It didn't for some reason. I had a slide about if you're not sure if you're not ready or not. And there is something called a social media test drive. And that's actually a tool that I think it would be really good for parents who want to see where their kids are, or even just thinking about safety rules. And there's sort of simulations that you can try about how to make the good username and what's a good way to post, what's a safe way to post. I've included that in my document as well, a link to how to get to that. But you're right, that would be a really great conversation to have in elementary school. So maybe stay tuned for Talk Tuesday for elementary coming up.
Great idea. And another question, we had a couple questions about how this presentation will be shared. And we'll work with the advancement team to make sure that it's in ASD News by link. And that also you have Heather's resource sheet, which is really great. Another thing that we want to do is also share more about what we're doing in terms of social emotional programming overall. So you'll see in Cheryl's Cheryl Gruber's principal letter this week, a team has written a little bit about what we're doing overall. So that has to do with the social media component, but also in general, how do we support social emotional learning in the middle school? So look for that. There's also some great discussion prompts that we're trying to push out too, because sometimes you get into the rut of how was your day, and kids just say good or nice, and it's hard to know how to dig a little deeper at this age. So we want to give you some resources on that as well. So all those things will be coming. Look for it in ASD News and the principal's letters. And we'll make sure that you have it in a couple different places.
And I do have to say that sometimes it's hard trying to have your kids in a public space where you can hear what's going on, because sometimes you don't want to have to hear what's going on because it could be very loud and silly. But I think that, again, that idea of the public spaces and not being afraid to your kid to be wherever is so important. I think at this time, that comfort level of we're not hiding anything from anybody is a really important thing to think about too. Yeah, because our house is a wild rumpus, I have to say, but it's a good thing to hear sort of also what's happening around the school, and also that fun of being able to say, you know, I saw this on TikTok, Mom. I think it's hilarious. It reminded me of you. And the fact that they would bring it over and show it to me is, again, those conversations you want to be able to have with your child.
Well, and I do just want to say again, you know, I know sometimes it feels like it's too late and that, you know, you've lost control. It's not too late to establish or to reestablish boundaries and expectations or agreements as a family. It might be a little bit more challenging. It'll be a steeper hill to climb, but it's not too late. And so, again, we hope to just empower you and give you, I've said it before, but the permission to parent and the permission to put these things in place for your children, because again, it's about their safety and it's about them growing and developing in a healthy way.
We have kind of an interesting question that gave me a flashback to when I was in middle school. The question is, can the school be a bit more prescriptive other than setting guidelines? Is there a way we can agree as a school and parents that gaming ends at a certain time? And it just goes on to talk about how some parents let their kid game until, or do Minecraft, for example, until 11:30 at night. And by not letting our child participate, we're limiting his social interactions. And the reason I said that it made me flash back to my time in middle school is because I remember having a similar conversation with my parents about curfew, and you know, my friends being able to go out until midnight and I could only go out until 10, and you know, that limiting my social interactions. I think there is a limit of the scope of what the school can do. Every family does have different values and different rules, and that's just not something we can prescribe. We can set guidelines, but we know it's difficult, you know, and sometimes you have to have hard conversations with your kids about why you have the rules and the values that you do within your house. I don't think that there would be, you know, that would be something that would be really hard for the school to enforce. We can definitely set guidelines that we believe are research based and based on the developmental health of kids at this age, but to send out a, you know, an edict or a mandate about when kids need to go to bed is beyond the scope of the school, and that would fall more into the parent realm. But I know it can create some difficult conversations at home and can kind of make you feel like you're depriving your child of that social interaction that they crave, especially given the circumstances now. So it's something that every family, I think, has to navigate on their own. And there's no easy answers, unfortunately. There are some kids I'd like to show up at their house and make sure they get to bed on time, but I'm not sure that would go well. But thanks for the question. I know it's a challenging one.
And again, a lot of times kids will say, everybody else gets to do it except me. And that's not true.
And that's really important. You know, sometimes we forget about the power that parents have collectively. So the ability to kind of get together with parents and be able to say, you know, we're going to share these kind of expectations, or just to publicize, you know, like it's not, sometimes it feels that way, like everyone's doing it, but it's not really the case. But we know that some kids are able to stay later, you know, so, and that's a family decision that you have to make, and how, you know, it's not always easy. Follow-up conversation. Can we have a conversation with kids that they need to listen and adhere to their parents' rules as a part of the values that ASD wants them to have? We try and communicate that. Yep, we definitely try and communicate that students should respect the rules of their parents. And it is part of our rule, you know, our core values of respect. And so that definitely would be something that we have conversations with students and should probably encourage more. So thank you for that. It's tough though. It's tough, especially at this age. Yeah. Well, thanks. I'm going to end it there. Again, we'll share this out. If you have other questions, both Heather, Courtney, and I can serve as a resource, or your grade level counselor as well. So don't hesitate to reach out, especially if you're dealing with a particular challenging set of circumstances. Really happy to see so many people come online to participate today and spread the word. Once you see it posted, it would be great. I know some people are planning to watch it, watching it on recording. So thanks for your participation today. Thanks to Courtney and Heather for joining in. And we'll see you around, hopefully sooner rather than later. So long.